This next panel is going to be really exciting. This is the M&A panel. So without further ado, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and kick it off.
Thank you, thank you. I feel like we're up here giving a safety brief, and everybody just wants to go get some cocktails. And so please stay with us. We have some fantastic individuals who are going to share their stories and give their tips on, one of the things that founders seek, and that's an exit in one way or another. And there's some are more complicated than others, so I'm excited about that. But a little bit about myself, Sebastian Magraner. I am a Marine Corps artillery officer in a previous life. I did the HIMARS artillery rocket system and deployed it to OEF back in 2011-12. Actually came here to the Bay Area in San Jose, where I was the officer selection officer for 3 years, bringing young men and women into the Marine Corps. But decided to get out, went to grad school, and joined Wells Fargo's corporate investment bank, where I started off first in the industrials capital goods group, worked on industrial automation, industrial software, energy storage, and of all things, actually some cybersecurity. Now, I've just transitioned to a role last year called diverse segments. So we are focused now on clients, customers, and companies with diverse principles, veterans being one of them, and making sure that you all receive the same investment banking services that every other company does, whether that be corporate investment banking, whether that be commercial real estate, capital markets, et cetera. But the stars of our shows, Brad, a little bit about yourself first.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Brad Davis. I'm the former president and CEO of Forensic Logic COPLINK. My story is I'm a Bay Area kid, born and raised back east of Dartmouth for undergrad before joining the Navy as an intelligence officer. Showed up at Naval Air Station Pensacola Officer Candidate School in August of 2001. So like everyone else in the world, got swept up in global events that happened the next month. Found myself as the Air Intelligence Officer for Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron 1, or VQ-1, flying the venerable EP-3E, affectionately known as the War Pig, flying combat surveillance missions over Iraq, Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, Iran, 02 to 04. And then 04 to 06, I was tapped to be the Navy's liaison between NAVCENT 5th Fleet and a lot of the commercial maritime, petroleum, and shipping communities throughout the Middle East. Very rewarding work, where I think I developed this lifelong affinity or affliction, however you want to look at it, of operating at this intersection between public and private sectors. I love the ability of one to benefit the other. Gladly, after that, gave up designs on law school, which I was very pleased to have done. Instead, went back to Dartmouth for my MBA, jointly with a Master's in Public Administration from the Kennedy School. Found myself in consulting with the Monitor Group, now Monitor Deloitte in their federal practice, essentially working with 3-letter agencies, trying to access data in unique and novel ways as part of their counter-terrorist efforts, and discovered what would become sort of a life, the rest of my lifelong calling, which is understanding a tremendous blight and a tremendous deficiency in the American landscape, which is the fact that there are about 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, and each one of them capture critically valuable information on bad actors, and there really is no mechanism for that information to flow internally within their own systems, let alone across the county or across the state or across the country. And as a result, as a society, we have 18,000 pinhole views of these trans-jurisdictional networks that wreak untold damage on our communities and our economy. Human trafficking networks, drug runners, arms traffickers, fraud, terrorist cells, and really felt that I wanted to take a stab at solving this. Found a tiny little company here in the Bay Area called Forensic Logic. They had 6 people and a pocket full of dreams, but I thought a really great, novel approach of rather than moving towards complex analytics, really focusing on simple search engines and that ability to kind of harness data across jurisdictions and systems and present it to the detectives, the police, and whatnot. Joined them, and we were growing not nearly fast enough. We were a small company trying to grow organically at the speed of government, which is to say very slowly. At the time, we were competing against what was sort of the aging, ailing juggernaut of the space, which was a division of IBM called COPLINK. They had done enormous work back in the wake of 2001, sort of consolidating the nation's data landscape and public safety, but had never really invested in the technology after that, and it was this old dinosaur. I guess we're going to talk a little bit about some of our corp dev efforts, so I'll skip to some of the quick. In a highly improbable series of events, we went right past Series A, raised growth equity, acquired a division of IBM as a 6-person company, went from 50 customers to many thousands, from 50 million documents to 5 billion, executed a wide-ranging partnership with Thomson Reuters, 7x'd our headcount overnight. I was tapped as CEO. I think I had a second kid during all of this, hard to remember. And then we would go on and build that entity, which then we woke up and were operating the largest network of sensitive data in the history of the country, and grew that for about 4 or 5 years until our exit last year, acquisition by ShotSpotter Technologies. I'm now taking a little time off and looking forward to taking on a book project with a good friend and colleague of mine, the former Los Angeles County Sheriff Jim McDonnell, on the state of policing and law enforcement in America. And I think that brings me to present. Thanks for coming with me.
Yeah, my story's not that good. So all the stuff that he did before this company, like having the kid and going to grad school and stuff, I did that after I sold the company, because that's when I had some free time. But there's probably at least a few of you, Tyler made a joke about the old people. Thanks, Tyler, you punk. He looked at me when he did it. But there's probably a few guys in here, or gals, that were born after I got out of the Army. There's at least a couple of you. So in any case, I was Army brat. I enlisted in the Army, went to West Point, chose air defense. I chose air defense. Thank you. That's the only way I could get to Germany with a class rank of 823. And I was a great lieutenant, but decided to get out as a captain. Clinton was president, the Army was getting smaller. First Gulf War, I was stuck in Germany. Move on to the next phase of life. I went into pharmaceuticals like a lot of, junior military officers, crushed it because I worked harder than anybody. I wasn't the best sales guy. I wasn't the smartest, the clinical knowledge, but I out-hustled, right? Most of the sales folks, they're kind of lazy. If you find one that works 8 hours a day, you're finding a good one. And that's just the way it is. But I was in sales, did sales leadership, then moved in-house to Abbott Laboratories, Fortune 100 company at the time, and started doing leadership and management development. And so I worked with district managers, regional managers to help them become more effective in leading their sales teams. And so in that role, I discovered that being in a Fortune 100 company is not where I wanted to be. I like the autonomy, the flexibility, the ability to create my own culture in an environment away from a big office building. And so, like all good organizations it started over beer, over Thanksgiving with a good buddy of mine, and we decided to start a company. And so he wrestled in college, so he wasn't that smart. You heard my class rank, so we had to invest some time in recruiting some actual smart guys. So we got 2 guys from UVA to join us who were really good in strategy and sales. We got another guy who was an incredible technologist, and we started an IT company. And we changed what we did several times. At first, we started off as a VAR, value-added reseller. We sold a lot because we were good salespeople. But we were growing too quick, not making the money we wanted to. We still weren't taking paychecks. This is like a year in. And so we decided we needed to get a little bit smarter about what we were doing. And we became an infrastructure company. And we hired some really good former NCOs who were great at IT infrastructure. And we took off doing that. It was back in the time when President Obama had issued a directive to consolidate data centers. And so we did that for a couple of years. We were really good at it, and we got a good reputation. And then we morphed again because we hired another subject matter expert, another Army guy who had worked at Cybercom, and we became a cyber company. Still doing the infrastructure. And then we morphed again. We started doing capacity as a service and routers, port switches, and running running the email system for all the Department of Defense through DISA. And so, 15 years from 2005, basically when we started, to 2019 when we sold. We grew from five guys in a Regis office suite to about 450 folks and 200 subs underneath us, and $180 million the year we sold. So why did we sell? Well, it's tough out there. First 10 years were pretty fun, but then you start dealing with personalities. Your company gets big, and what I always liked was knowing everybody's name, knowing where everyone was from, knowing their spouse's name, their wife, their husband, how many kids they had, what's their favorite sport. I didn't know that anymore. And then we won a couple of big contracts. And one contract we probably should have won, but they never even checked our financials, right? And I say financials because the contract required so much equipment that we would have had to lease that it really it could have put us in a bad spot, right? So I would have had to go back. He talked about mortgaging your house. I did that. When we started the company, I mortgaged my house. I didn't want to have to do it again, right? And so we realized that with $1.2 billion in backlog, it was probably a good time to sell. We sold 2019 for $250 million. Here's the beauty, and we'll talk about some do's and don'ts. But we settled our lawsuit with the company that we sold to because they tried to stiff us on a couple $1 million. And so that was last Friday. Last Friday was a good day. And they literally just tried to outspend us with legal fees and stuff like that. And I love money, but my integrity means more than anything. And I would have kept pumping money into that just to prove that those guys are wrong. Anyway, probably didn't need to hear that, but you're up.
Here we go. Hi, I'm Lamine Zarrad, founder and CEO of a company called Stellarfi. It's a financial wellness platform that helps folks build credit by paying their bills. Stellarfi is my third fintech company that I founded. Virtually every single company I build is an economic empowerment space. It's very personal for me. So before I tell you about the acquisitions and all the good stuff, I'll tell you a bit about myself and my story and my sort of ascent, if you will. I'm an immigrant. My family escaped an ethnic conflict now in the country of Azerbaijan. Back then it was part of USSR. We fled to Moscow because of our ethnicity, and then fled Moscow. You didn't want to be in Moscow in the 1990s. Across 7 countries into Netherlands, and then came to US. My very first real job was United States Marine Corps. I enlisted right out of high school. And then used that experience to integrate culturally and really sort of figure out things out, right, as a new citizen, if you will. I've made a ton of mistakes financially, like many young Marines and like many immigrants, and learned from those mistakes. Some of them really painful, still haunt me, like my credit score. And then made decisions that really sort of led to educating myself and bettering myself when it comes to finances. And when I reached a certain level of comfort in my personal life, and when my family was in a place where I felt, we don't have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck, I started to think about how do I help others by productizing some of those lessons. So I landed in financial services after business school, Merrill Lynch at the height of the financial crisis, which was an amazing experience. If anyone survived it, you know what I'm talking about, pressure cooker. And I decided that I was disenchanted in capital markets at the time. If you guys were in finance then, it felt like a house of cards, kind of like it feels now. But decided that I really wanted to understand banking better. And so I left private sector and joined U.S. Treasury as a federal bank regulator in hopes of really understanding banking and fixing banking. It was really naive at the time. And so they gave me 36 nationally chartered banks to supervise, and I spent a couple of years doing deep dives into banks and their books, looking top down and really understanding the institution of banking and all of its misalignments, to put it nicely. And so one thing that was clear to me is that banks did not know how to use technology effectively. And so I got a bunch of ideas. I was always very entrepreneurial, and started to identify those misalignments and decided that I can get out there and go build a company to help banks be better. So I left the Treasury to start my very first company, and we actually use blockchain technology, and don't judge me. Back in 2015, we built an NFT play. It was really interesting. We were cross-stamping transactions for high-risk businesses to create data integrity, which is what banks want, the regulators want, the auditors want. That company took off pretty quickly. We were featured in New York Times. It was really interesting. We were solving a problem for high-risk industry. Some of you may know, if you live in the states like California, the cannabis space, by helping banks serve those businesses. In 2016, DOJ took a very different stance, and quite literally, that business opportunity ended. But we built so much interesting tech that we were able to then sell that tech. It was an asset sell. As a business, it was a failure. Overall, it was a successful kind of a transition, if you will, for me and my team. We sold the assets, we paid off our investors, and then we seeded my next company. And this time I thought, I really want to do economic empowerment, and I don't want to do anything crazy that will potentially, could end the business, something we can control like policy or regulations. And so we went after this new and sexy thing called the creative economy, and we built a bank for freelancers and creatives. And so when you think about it, like why would freelancers need a bank? And we realized that freelancers had not either seasonal, non-recurring income, and we wanted to give them a full stack, a bank account, payments processing, access to invoice factoring, all in one app. And we did. And that company called Joust did quite well. We got acquired by a legal tech company in Austin, Texas called Zen Business. After the acquisition, I took over as head of product at Zen Business. And what we did is we took a legal tech company, a neobank, and then repositioned it to go after Shopify. The idea was that Shopify does a great job serving e-commerce, but there's a bunch of those micro businesses, freelancers, creatives, and so forth, who need access to banking, need access to legal tech, need access to compliance tools and so forth, tax tools. Let's give them one really easy thing to use. And we did. And that company went from $100 million at the time of the acquisition. Now, under sort of my leadership and when it comes to product organization, to nearly $2 billion a year and a half later. I served my time, getting that company there. We 10x'd, our stake in the company, and then decided that I want to get more narrow with my economic empowerment and go after consumers this time with a tool that gives them access to capital specifically. So as you can see, my progression was, let's start on the periphery with banking and help businesses that kind of interesting and new, and then let's help those businesses, the real businesses that are trying to get off the ground, these micro operations, and now let's help consumers, which is something that's very personal for me, as I told you. In any case, Stellar is doing great. No plans for any time to get acquired anytime soon, but I'm happy to talk about the other two experiences. One was an asset sell, and the other one was a more traditional M&A transaction.
I really love that each of you hit on things that successful entrepreneurs have to go through: failure, hardship, sacrifice. And that's sometimes something that a lot of new startups, founders, entrepreneurs just need to hear. So when I hear some of those stories, we hear a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, time went into building your company. So let's really narrow in on that exit. Tell us about the exit, and really, what was the catalyst for getting there? And Brad, I got to stop you real quick before you go. I'm a Marine. We got some Marines in the audience, so please, you got to keep it simple. We don't have a sand table, some crayons to draw this out on a whiteboard, so keep it easy. But please, tell us about that.
All right. Well, the exit for us, it was like everything we did, a little bit unorthodox. So we were definitely this fish that swallowed this whale of acquiring this division, this idea that we could modernize this sort of decrepit infrastructure of this massive data network. And a lot of people, actors in the industry, had been sort of sitting around the periphery of kind of waiting to peck at this rotting carcass and maybe pick off customers off of this thing. And when we acquired it, then the press releases came out from the competition in the industry of these nobodies from the Bay Area just bought COPLINK, you should come join, come sign with us. But what happened is that, I think our reputation was excellent. We were small, but we had a great product, and you had a beleaguered customer base of, thousands and thousands of law enforcement agencies that were tired, frankly, of Big Blue, of the bureaucracy and so on. And they really responded to what we were doing. And as a result, we solidified this market, we solidified the customer base, we solidified the revenue, we were successful in our efforts to repoint the data connections up into our cloud environment and in essence sort of modernize this massive, infrastructure. And when that happened, some of the very people who were press releasing started knocking on our doors very quickly. These are big Fortune 100 sized companies, domestically, internationally, who what we realized what we had done is we had de-risked this endeavor of modernizing the tech and also really the operational risk of like, gosh, we can't buy this thing and then we screw it up or there's a data breach and now all these cities are upset at us. So when we discovered that, we had nothing to lose. We were like 6 people. And so our risk appetite was high because we were probably not going anywhere without this acquisition. And their risk appetite was very low. So that sort of arbitrage at risk was what led the industry to start, within like 5 or 6 months, start some pretty aggressive inbound requests for acquisition. So if anyone's accounting at home, we had just done an acquisition. We had just essentially been acquired by the private equity firm, and then we were going through another corp dev, acquisition, process within the span of about 9 months. So it was sporty. And I think that, to my mind, the lesson learned from that was like, again, what's important to you is not necessarily important to them. What's important to them is not necessarily important to you. They were worried about risk mitigation. We were worried about getting something done. And so what we did is we sort of entertained a half process, sort of this weird process, like a mini process, where we wanted to receive some of these inbound, overtures. We did, and, time is a part of ROI, so it was potentially pretty quick turnaround. The offers came in, they were flattering but not compelling. We felt that we had a lot more left to do and a lot more left to accomplish. And I would say that the next few years as we were growing the company, looking back on that initial period of that sort of pseudo process was pro and con. I think the pro is that it really allowed us to smoke out I think the serious contenders in the space, and we always kind of felt we would go to strategic instead of a PE, and that was really valuable. It allowed us to build deep relationships with a lot of the other folks in the space and a lot of the other players, which was very, very valuable when we actually would go to our ultimate exit. The con is it's just incredibly distracting. And for those of you who are building companies and seeing those through and you're thinking ahead to this, just don't underestimate like the little multiple layers of distraction that a sale process can have within your organization. There are people who put in a lot of time. There are people who have, are looking forward to this big payday, this big culmination of years of hard work. And I think looking back, I would have probably mitigated that. I was spending a lot of time flying around and steak dinners and all that good stuff. But I really wish I had kind of pushed a lot more of that aside and really focused on the execution of growing the business as opposed to trying to manage, this third corp dev process. And then when it came time for us actually to sell, we really had felt that we had accomplished everything we set out to do. We had consolidated the market. We had grown into the federal space. We had taken whole entire states and gotten them on board. So the first time in American history, all entire states were sharing data, amongst each other and then with the rest of the network. And then it became time. And it was a weird time. It was post George Floyd and defund the police and police budgets and, revenue projections were there. There's obviously the horrible, wrenching social aftermath of George Floyd. It was in the midst of COVID, and that was a very bizarre time. But we went through the process, and we really found this organization that had been knocking on our door for a long time, which was ShotSpotter Technologies, also based here in the Bay Area, a wonderful company who was part of an overall trend in the government and public safety space where hardware manufacturers who had done quite well were feeling the pressure from their stakeholders and their investors to start moving into more data and more software capabilities. Motorola had done it, Taser, now Axon, had done it, and ShotSpotter was feeling that as well. And they really felt that our platform was not only a tremendous complement to what they did, would sort of unleash a lot of the capabilities of their gunshot detection systems in major cities throughout the country, but really would allow them to sort of make this an entree into the higher margin realm of software. And so what was very appealing is we knew these guys really well. There was not a lot of gamesmanship, not a lot of puffery, not a lot of nonsense. After all of the complexity of like the 5-month corp dev effort with IBM, it was a wonderful, wonderful change of pace. And in the end, we sold at the beginning of this year. And something that was incredibly compelling too was that they weren't experts in what we did. And that was really helpful because we knew our business really, really, really well. And they said, you guys have now the level of autonomy to go forward and go forth and multiply doing what you do really well. And we will come in where we feel that we can mutually reinforce each other with our different product offerings. But for people who really, a lot of these people have been doing this for over a decade. And so to have that, not fearing that we were going to be shut down or we would, kind of get either not enough support or, way too much support, it was a great exit for us. Thank you.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, some similarities. Probably 5 years before we sold, we had a company come to us, and we, like you did, we wasted our time, right? And so you did a little dance with them. They wanted to see all your financials. It just really wasted a lot of time, took the focus, and we probably lost some momentum in doing what we were really good at, and that was operating a business because we did that. So what did we do a couple years later? Same mistake, right? But this time it was because the guys were West Point guys, right? And so, hey, it's some older West Point guys, let's listen to them. And they wasted our time, which is going to happen, right? You guys are going to waste each other's time in this room. It's going to happen. You're probably wasting your time right now. And then we decided we wanted to get serious about it, right? And so we'd been at it for 14 years. I could tell my CEO was getting tired. He was spending a lot more time working on his nonprofit that he had started and less time doing visionary strategic work that I wanted him to do. His brother also was our CTO, and those guys, they didn't get along very well, right? Which I would never work with either of my brothers. I love them both, but it just wouldn't work well. So get some good business partners that bring unique skills, but for God's sakes, limit the family. It makes it tough, right? Because then the wives hate each other, the husbands hate each other. It's just a mess. It ruins Christmas. So we got serious about selling, and actually we had always built a company we wanted to sell. We knew we wanted to sell. But we thought when we started in 2005, we were in our 30s, we were young, and we were like, yeah, let's build a company, let's sell it for $50 million, you'll get that much, we'll all be rich. Well, guess what? You start splitting that 5 ways, and $10 million doesn't go that far when you're only in your 40s, right? You need more money, especially when you're the one brother and you have like 5 cars and you buy a little plane. And, that's why they didn't get along either. In any case, we decided to get serious about selling the organization. All along, we had been interviewing, spending time with lawyers, investment bankers, finding out the ones that we could work with the best. And we thought we had that all wrapped up, and then we ended up changing investment bankers at the 12th hour, but that's okay. So we decided to go through a process, put together a package, sent it out after sitting down and thinking, what companies, what private equity firms do you want to send this to? Getting back so many responses, we set up management presentations. And guess what? When you do 15 management presentations in the period of 2 weeks, then your company knows you're selling, right? Because you're not in the office. I wore a suit for the first time in months because I didn't wear suits, right? And management presentations are a pain, right? 4 hours a piece. We were doing 2 a days. And then people start making offers. And we had told people to make offers as if it's an asset sale, come with your biggest and best. And some people came through, and somehow 3 different people came up with the same number. But we looked at all, even ones that were within 10%, because we wanted to do like an indexing of all these different organizations that were interested. What's their culture? Who do we know that works there? Are they going to respect the equity of our folks on the programs, the projects that they're running? What's their culture like? How are they going to treat our folks? There was a lot of emphasis on how are they going to treat our people when we're gone. because we knew that they were going to chop off the head. They didn't need us because we were ultimately probably going to sell to another strategic who had already had leadership in place. And so we did a bunch of those in April. We signed the sale agreement in July, like July 15th, and we sold July 31st. And August 8th, I was fired. And so that's it. But there's a lot of things you got to think about. It's an emotional time, right? They did allow me to stand in front of my employees, and teammates, and do a all-hands meeting at the end. That was tough, right? Especially with some of those folks you've been working with for 10 years. They'd become friends, kind of family. I try to not throw the word family around too much. I always like to say team members because you can fire team members, kind of get stuck with your family. But so that's our experience.
Yeah, so where do I start? First of all, I have a philosophy when it comes to M&A, generally speaking. I was on two sides of the transaction, like I said, two cells, and then inside of the organization, we scoped out multiple different opportunities and acquired a couple of companies along the way. And so as a company, you can only acquire two things. You can acquire revenues or you can acquire technology. You can't acquire teams. You can't absorb another culture effectively. Your organization is like a body, right? It's a microorganism, and it will reject it. And the other microorganism will reject that other organization as well. So you have to go into that kind of a thing with a sober mind. So if you're selling your revenues, which means customers, right, accounts and so forth, you should accept the fact that I am selling something that's valuable to the buyer that is going to go well beyond, my intention and my culture that I wanted to build, with an understanding that I may be fired or I'll have a finite amount of time to transition out. If I'm selling tech, the same thing. If I'm thinking that I will be part of this organization, you just need to, think about it as potential employee and where you're going to fit and so forth. And so when we were building the second company, we went into it with a very defined objective, and you have to set it. What is it that you're managing towards? Are you managing toward an acquisition? Are you managing toward potential IPO in the future? Because this is a very different organization, right? Are you managing this business to be a lifestyle business that's just going to supplement your rent and lets you have a vacation home? That's fine too. Like none of those there's not an option that's better than the other. But if you are managing toward an acquisition, you have to start thinking about what is that you're building and what's the acquirer going to want to buy from you. And once again, you can't sell that whole thing. They'll piecemeal it eventually. And so what you need to do is start thinking about partnerships, because if an acquirer is buying features from you, tech, or buying those revenues, you need to start thinking well in advance, who will want to buy this and why will this make sense for them to go through the painstaking steps and through due diligence, through some back-end evaluations and eventually integration. And so you might want to start scoping out different businesses in your, in your domain. There's a presentation on crossing the chasm earlier, and what was interesting about that presentation, when you're in a chasm, that's a perfect opportunity for you to start scoping out folks or organizations in that Main Street space, because Main Street, especially as they're sort of approaching their end of life cycle, they're thinking of innovation, they're thinking of like the next step in a journey. You could very well be that leg. They can pull you in, they can give you the resources and catapult you forward. So this is kind of, that's the general mindset. And so the way, for example, it worked for us, we build a relationship with the acquirer. The acquirer did something very well, something we couldn't do, and that's help businesses form and manage all the compliance behind the scenes. We would then give them a bank account. So it was a natural kind of a funnel, if you will. The entrepreneur decides to start a business. They'll use the acquirer's technology to form an LLC, get all the legal docs in place, and then we would give them our product, which was a bank account, and then we'll give them payments and so forth. And after we partnered up with them, and after the whole thing was working, it became very clear that those two components would work really well under one roof. And that's how the acquisition happened. We didn't have to go to investment bankers to shop us around. We knew that the management team liked the tech, they liked some of the folks on the team, not everyone. And you know, that was a natural evolution, and we sort of made our own. We created our own roadmap and guaranteed our own destiny in terms of like being acquired. And to me, that's probably one of the most important things, is just being honest with the path forward with your business. On the other hand, you know, sometimes acquisitions are fire salts. You screwed up, and you try to pivot a couple of times, and there's nowhere to go, and so you're looking for for a lifeline, and that's a different story. That's you shopping yourself around, hoping someone will buy pieces of a failed enterprise.
Yeah, it seems like you need to have that right partner as you're going through the process, and you're just hoping for the right buyer and hoping they're not wasting your time. But as we're thinking about some of the entrepreneurs here that may be right on the verge of considering an exit or down the road, what can they do to best position themselves both as a company, but internally within their C-suite, within their core group of individuals? How can they prepare themselves for an exit?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have to start with stating the obvious, like, you got to build a great company. And let's just assume, for the sake of argument, you've done that and you are getting all the attention and affection of the industry or the private equity folks as they start circling or whatever it might be. So we're just going to assume that happens. So when you get closer into the thing, I think of a couple things come to mind. One is always, you will be well served trying to get the story behind the story when it comes to your industry. Heraclitus was a Greek philosopher who said the unapparent connection is more powerful than the apparent connection. And as founders about to sell your company, you are going to get bombarded with apparent connections. Oh, we have this wonderful complementary tech. We have this complementary customer base. Or together we're going to thwart this competitor that we both hate because they suck. They're going to get through all of this. Cultural fit, cultural fit. You're going to hear so much about cultural fit. I'm not saying it's unimportant, but at some point it's like, all right, okay, my tech nerds who are antisocial are going to be equally antisocial as your tech nerds who are antisocial. They're both going to hate the holiday party equally. But not knocking it, but you're just going to hear all of this. But there's always something behind the scenes going on in terms of motivation, in terms of decision makers, in terms of what that organization is looking for. And the extent that you can suss that out earlier on will save you a tremendous amount of time. And I think a theme that we're going to see a lot here is distraction. If you're running that company, you have to stay laser focused on hitting your KPIs, growing your company, building a great company. So examples, we went through so many blind alleys. We were at one where we had this, long conversation with this guy I'd known for years, great guy. Let's put these companies together. It's going to be fantastic. Great. We're in the sale process. Awesome. We think we can do this. All right. And then, he says, hey, I talked with management and I think we're good. I think we're really good for this, for this merger. Do you have any investors who could make it happen? And it was the first time I'd heard the merger and acquisition in this whole discussion. I've had situations where people, like heads of the business units or the North American units of companies, are going way out forward on making, trying to get to the altar, and they've not even run it past the bean counters in Berlin and so on. To the extent that you can figure out what those real motivations are. Because that bean counter in Berlin, she might give about 40 minutes of effort into this whole thing, but she's the one who can, call it out or nix it. I've been in a situation where the finance person overseas, the head of the business unit was texting me real time in a Zoom, telling me like what words to say to this, finance manager. It was just all, it gets very surreal. And so, the extent, I'm definitely going to sound like the old intelligence officer here, but to the extent that I love going to the conferences and finding the old grizzled veteran or finding the person who, you just sort of click with or whatever, and when everyone else filters home, back to the hotel rooms, take that person out for drinks. Like figuring out what's going on, the career motivations of the people who are driving these processes. There could be situations where, someone who's driving the sale or the acquisition effort, like, oh yeah, well that person's up for promotion and the person who's going to take his spot totally hates you guys. And so you always will be well served and you will save precious time and precious focus if you understand the foundational, real behind the scene motivations, the unapparent connections as opposed to just the apparent connections. And I think the other thing I would recommend is, the co-founder of the private equity firm invested in us, great guy on our deal team, and we're entering into this, and he made the comment one time, he says, Brad, I just kind of think of this whole acquisition thing as just sort of a big game. And, you just kind of have to treat it like a game. And I'm like, dude, every time I miss my numbers, you crawl up my ass and explode. Like, you have not really been telling me, like, this is like a game and so forth. Why this nonchalant attitude? And I think the lesson there is not that it's unimportant. It's that this process has its very unique set of rules and protocols that you will be well served to try to understand when you go into it. So, put another way, the stakes are high and the rules are very strange. And as part of this, like, you're going to have, these companies coming to you and say, this is a great fit, we're fantastic, this is going to be wonderful, we're going to make, beautiful harmony together. And then you're going to get into the due diligence and so on, and they are going to find whatever wart they can to hammer in on that thing and point out why you're a piece of shit company, and because they don't want to pay very much money. But we still love you, but you're a piece of shit. But definitely don't sell yourself to the other guy because they're worse. And so it just gets all very odd. And I think I channel certain things in life where we've gone through this that have helped me, like dating, right? I mean, that's a weird process. Like, yeah, honey, I would love to watch Real Housewives with you. That sounds fantastic. Lies. I mean, total lies. And we all came into the military through a very, very weird process, right? Through boot camp, through basic, officer candidate school, the academies, ROTC, whatever it might be, which is an incredibly stupidly bizarre process as well. Like, you find this realization, like, I'm a grown man, and another grown man is screaming at me because I did not fold my underwear to his satisfaction. This is very, very strange. But your response to that is not like, I am going to schedule a little time with the drill instructor, and he and I are going to sit down, and I'm going to voice my concerns and ask him politely to reprioritize and so on. It doesn't work that way. You have to, in some ways, embrace like the rules and the weirdness of the game. So know that it's so hard because you are so emotionally invested into this baby that you have grown and built and developed, and you're about to set it, free into this culminating event. And it can be so hard not to take things personally when those people are beating up that whatever wart it might be. It's hard not to take it personally when they're beating up your baby, so to speak. But I really, I've had a lot of time to reflect on that advice that my investor gave to me, and I think it's very, very sound. Treat it as boot camp or officer candidate school. Treat it as a drill instructor, and to the extent that you need to, play the game. Put on the dress that you need to for the person who's bringing you to the dance, whatever it might be. So I think if you hold those two things around, you're probably a little bit further. Those are some of the hard lessons that I think I had to learn through tough experience.
Jack, so I'll answer the question a little bit differently so we don't overlap at all. But I would say, number one, make sure even years before you're going to sell your company or you might go to market, take care of your family, right? So get your financial planners, set up a trust for your kids, put a little slice of the company in there so you get a valuation.
A nuptial agreement.
I didn't do that. I got married 5 years ago. I didn't do it. So if I lose all my money, that's all right. I'll make some more. Plus, my kid's got a lot of money now, and so I'll lean on him. So take care of your family. Like, seriously. Do the financial planning. Find a way to make sure you own enough of the company so that if you have any socioeconomic status, you keep it for if you're ever going to do any government work. But give pieces of it away at a low valuation so that your kids don't pay taxes on it because they already own it, right? Or something like that. Anyway, there's some smart finance people that can help you out. The other thing I'll tell you is when you're building your business, you build it like you're going to run it forever, right? You don't cut corners. You don't say, I'm not going to do that because I might sell. Like, if you need to invest in some software, you invest in the software. What you don't do is you don't run personal opinion. You don't run golf memberships through it. You don't run your Saturday night dinner with your spouse. You don't run that through it, especially if you have business partners. Because it's not fair. Because people always do it a little bit different. And so we had a rule when we started. No private stuff goes through. It just doesn't happen. That way, when you go and you sell the company and they go and they look at your books and they're going to dig back a few years, they don't want to see that stuff. Nobody does. Just keep them clean. Now, I know guys who they've decided they want a lifestyle business. They want to make around $400K a year. Do all the golf memberships you want because no one's going to buy you because your EBITDA is going to be crap, right? So. That's my point.
real gold nuggets in there for sure. So I'll talk about technology business that's VC backed specifically. That's my experience. I can't emphasize this enough. Your VCs are going to be one of your biggest allies or potentially your biggest enemies in the transaction, so pick your VCs wisely. There's so many different stories about companies like Venmo being acquired by PayPal because they were hitting a wall and they had nowhere to go. I mean, Venmo is a success story now, but if Graycroft wasn't on their board and also on PayPal's or Braintree's board and didn't facilitate that transaction, there wouldn't be no Venmo, right? And so remember that. So when you're thinking about where is it that you headed, make sure that you have right partners on board. And VCs, we heard a couple of panels before, people always kind of compare, picking your VCs to dating. I don't think it's the best analogy. I think it's more like picking a wartime ally. You're running your little guerrilla band, and you want to make sure that you have right suppliers, right wartime allies with proper funding, proper channels, supply chain, and so forth to keep you alive and keep you fighting. And then if you need to, make an exit, they'll be the ones to help you facilitate that exit, not some investment banker. It's going to be ultimately your board and hopefully right people on your board. Once again, this applies to VC-backed technology companies, but I'm sure there's some sort of a similar element in any other type of operation.
So I want to make sure that we leave some time for some Q&A at the end. But that paper was signed, the deal's closed. How did that feel, and then how did that change your life subsequently afterwards? Because we know a lot of entrepreneurs. Right now, you may be kind of relaxed, taking a break. But what's next?
I mean, it felt good. Yeah, I think what happened to me is I was going out. Like most of my job was going and reaching out and engaging with high-ranking law enforcement executives, from police chiefs to sheriffs to federal, state agencies, and so forth. And I would go and pitch my case of why they needed to join this network, and like happened over and over again that they would. The gist of it was like, Brad, you're right. This is a very, very big problem, but I've got 15 problems over here that are absolutely enormous problems, and that and they were absolutely right. And I think for me, there was just this tremendous intellectual curiosity that I really liked, going to dinners with them and so on. And I liked to ask more about the 15, other enormous problems as opposed to just the one that we were solving. Probably didn't do, me in great stead as a CEO. But I think that for me personally, yes, there are lifestyle benefits that have happened. I discovered we had 3 kids. I thought it was just 2. But no, it was, and so there is that. Once you leave an operating role, the cortisol levels will drop, this existential dread of making payroll and what's going to happen to this thing, those melt away. And those are welcome things because you're right, you have to put family first. And there were times I did not do that, and I regret that. I truly do. But I have an incredibly supportive wife and family and so on. But for me, the real change I think that's happened is now with the book project, I really can sort of have this more full-throated intellectual exploration of those big, enormous problems facing this industry. And I think this is just a wonderful thing about some of the background that most of us have in this space. We've done amazing things. We have been where the rubber hits the road in terms of policy and the real world. We're all like kind of policy experts because we're the ones who have had to answer for the policy decisions that have happened, pay grades above us. And so I think that for me, I never would have had the understanding or the revelation of so many of the problems that are facing this country from a public safety and law enforcement standpoint if I had not done this job for the last 10 years. And I think this job prepared me to do that with the people that we'll be working with and my co-author, who's just fantastic. And so I'm really been looking forward to that in terms of, like I said, the exit affording me the ability to sort of more intellectually explore other problems. And I think hopefully if I do ever go back to chew glass and take on an operating role again, I'd like to think it would leave me better prepared to do so. So I think, that has been the nice change post-exit for me.
Yeah, so my exit was 3.5 years ago. So the first 6 months, I dropped my handicap from about 17 to about 12. I played a lot of golf. I saw more college football games than you could ever imagine. In one weekend, I saw 3 games in one weekend, Labor Day weekend. It was amazing. What else did I do? I dove into some of the nonprofits that I worked with. One's the Johnny Mac Soldiers Funds, take care of the educational needs of children of our fallen. Did a lot more work, activity, outreach, everything for that organization. Dove into transitioning veterans and just serving as a soundboard for them to ask questions. And I'm not telling you I gave them great answers, but they asked questions. What else? Eventually I got kind of bored, and so I went back to college. You know, I picked the SEC school, so I wanted to be too hard. Not Alabama, because I didn't want it to be too easy. And so I'm now a proud graduate of Auburn University as well as West Point. Yeah, War Eagle, there you go. And so what have I been doing since then? I'm on a few boards. I like to think I bring a common sense approach to some of the problems that boards have, because most of the problems that companies have are personal problems. A lot of the times, it's conflicting egos. It's people wanting to do more, people wanting to do less. It's all that kind of stuff, and that's what I'm good at. People say, someone said something about being an operator. Well, I'm an operator. That's what I do. Not a technologist, so I kind of stick to my lanes, and I find I'm good at that. The other thing I'm thinking about doing now is, you know, there's other ways to entrepreneurship rather than bootstrapping or starting. I'm looking at buying a company right now, a small kind of boutique company, so that I can run my golf memberships through it. Because I'll never sell it, right? But I made the mistake of joining 3 golf clubs, and I can't play them all because then, you know, COVID hit, and then me and my wife had a baby, you know, because COVID, you got all this free time. And so now I don't have any free time because I got a 15-month-old, and so I pay like $3,000 a month to play golf, and I play like 3 times a month. So that's pretty expensive. So I need somehow to pay for it.
I bought a boat.
Oh, I did buy a brand new pickup truck because I always wanted one.
Just treat yourself, right? Like if it's a successful exit and, you know, you've clearly been working hard for something and neglecting your health, doing all kinds of shit that we do as entrepreneurs, just enjoy it to an extent that you can. Some of us can't. My mind was already racing for the next thing that I'm doing now. You know, just try to take some time off. I read somewhere that whatever time you think you need, multiplied by 3, and try to actually commit to it and take it. So I thought I needed, you know, 2 to 3 months, and I should have taken about 9 months off, but I dove right into it. You know, my thing was always wanted to do many different things that I really didn't have time to or couldn't afford to do. So now what I do is I'm an LP in a fund, and I see professional investors actually putting money to use to good companies. And so that's gratifying. And while I'm building my own thing, I'm also watching other entrepreneurs doing other things, and you know that's super helpful for me as an entrepreneur as I'm building a company, and it's also gratifying. You know, there's no wrong or right thing to do. You just need to kind of time your exit, think about what you need to do in that transition, and do the next thing. Either retire or start a next company, or do whatever you want.
Do we have time for 1 question, 2 questions? Right here up front.
How do you take care of that emotional attachment to your baby? Right? When do you know it's the time to sell? And do you at some point begin to prepare for that? How's that release that happens maybe years before you actually sell?
I'll take first stab. First of all, don't get emotionally attached. It's inevitable, but try not to. This is why you don't refer to your team as a family, right? You have to fire people. You have to discipline people. This is a team, hopefully a high-performing team, and your company is hopefully a high-performing organization. It's not your baby, and it becomes abundantly clear in a transition because your baby is going to be tore apart. It doesn't matter what kind of acquirer you have, how good of a culture fit, mission alignment. None of that stuff really matters. Ultimately, it's going to be parted out for pieces. It happens every time in every single acquisition, and so. you don't get emotionally attached to it if you thinking about if you plan for the acquisition, if you're managing toward the acquisition, you get emotionally attached to the mission perhaps, right? And hopefully what you do is you align your company's mission, or rather the acquirer's mission with your mission, so you know that even if it's parted out, it's going to be part of this larger push to do X, right? For us, for example, is to help entrepreneurs and economic empowerment. And I knew for a fact that anyone who stayed with that organization, all of our tech is going to be used for that specific mission, and it made me feel good. But I also knew that there was no longer Joust. That Joust is gone.
Okay. Right over here.
Just got a weird question. Do you feel like your employees started acting a little bit differently when you guys were in talks for the exit? Like you said that you guys. Oh, thanks. You said that at one point you guys wasted your time entertaining offers, and then didn't go through with it. Did you experience any employees leaving because of that?
We didn't, because when you were just dancing with someone, you didn't bring a whole bunch of people in. Obviously, your CFO was involved, but you really didn't have to bring anybody else because they mostly just wanted to see numbers to start, right? Now, when you eventually went through a whole process, you got to bring people in kind of piecemeal, and you got to be honest and tell them what's going on, but also tell them that your expectation is they don't share that with anyone else. And so, look, your CFO's already in. At some point, you got to tell your contracting person. You got to dial in HR, and then people just kind of know. And nobody left because I think everyone was under the belief that we do the right thing for the organization, which ultimately, if you did that, that would be the right thing for the majority of the people.
Great. I want to thank all the panelists up here. I want to thank Sebastian. Great job moderating. I don't know if Victor is still in the room, but really want to thank all of Wells Fargo for their sponsorship of this event. And this concludes day one. Tomorrow we'll start at 09 here. I'll give some brief opening remarks, and then Henry Ward, a Marine, the CEO, co-founder of Carter, will talk. And he'll be interviewed by Quill Lawrence of NPR. If you ever listen to NPR and you listen to anything that's military or veteran affairs related, he's the person that is covering it. And so it'll be awesome to have him. And then we'll do women entrepreneurs, and then we have a full stack day. We plan day two to be just as good as day one, so we hope you all feel that. And if you have any feedback about today's sessions, please feel free to Slack Brendan, Karina, and I. We hope you all have a great and safe time networking this evening. Thank you all.